Okay, thank you very much, Anastasia. Thank you for the invitation. Great to be back in Maynooth and recognize also some friends in the audience. I'm glad to see also Jean is there and see some good friends here in the audience. I'm going to try to time myself out. Hopefully it will work out. I'm not sure, but I'll do my best. I was told that Palestinians are worse than the Irish in terms of timekeeping on a number of occasions, and I think that's true. Okay, so I was asked today if I could reflect a little bit on Gaza, what's happening in Gaza, and talk also to give that perspective based on my personal experience as well as academic experience. I work at Trinity College, Dublin. This is where I work there, and I teach and do some research work and so on. And I've come originally from Gaza. So I'm going to reflect a little bit on that and the current situation, and then move on to talk about the role of activists, civil society activists, the role of academics, as I see it in relation to global struggles for peace and justice, including Palestine, of course. Let's just, in terms of Palestine, let me just put that into context. When we talk about Palestine, it's important to put the issue into context. We're talking about a long struggle for land, a long struggle for identity, a long struggle for people who have been displaced, have been made refugees. We're talking also about a long struggle for land. And as well as land, we're talking about national rights, people who have been denied their national rights since 1948, and before that, since the British rule in Palestine, which was known as the British Mandate, another cover for colonialism in the region. And through the British Mandate, the Balfour Declaration was issued. And the Balfour Declaration, issued by the British government in 1917, spoke about creating a national home for Jewish people in Palestine. This was a Balfour Declaration 1917. Arthur James Balfour was the one who issued it on behalf of the British government. And in that text, what you can find is a clear British commitment to the creation of the State of Israel in the land of Palestine. Also a clear British commitment to the cause of Zionism, building a Jewish home in Palestine. But when you look also at this particular text, what you find is, and later on this text has turned into a policy, an active British policy in the region. When you look at it, what you find is there are two things. One is the national identity of the indigenous people of Palestine has been denied. There is no reference to it at all in that policy or in that text. Secondly, the political rights of the indigenous Palestinian people have not been recognized in the Balfour Declaration, as well as the subsequent the policies that emerged as a result of that. So we're talking about a long history of denial of identity and a long history of denial of national rights. This history, unfortunately, continued with the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. So Palestine issue is a global issue, is a moral issue. It's, as Edward Said said, it's a moral cause. That's what it is. It's a moral issue. And therefore, it has a great relevance to global struggles for community development, for justice, for human rights, for international law, and so on. Also, I was asked to reflect a little bit, this is the broader context, on Gaza, where I came from. Well, let me put that into context. Gaza has been recently on the news, and unfortunately we only hear of Gaza if there's fighting, if there's conflict, if there's people being killed, and so on. But Gaza has a long history as well as one place in Palestine. And of course, we're talking about Gaza, the West Bank, Jerusalem, and so on. But let me focus on Gaza a little bit. Gaza has a refugee population. 70% of them have come from 1948, the historical Palestine when Israel was created. So 70% of the population in Gaza, including my own family, are refugees from 1948 when Israel was created. Secondly, the demographic nature of Gaza. We're talking about, according to recent UN figures, over 52% of the population of Gaza are children under the age of 18. Okay? So largely we're talking about a child population. That's what we're talking about. But yet we are told it's a conflict, it's violence, it's people who want to destroy Israel, and so on. Yes, well, of course, there are groups here and there. But what we are talking about is largely a child and refugee population. Okay? That's what we're talking about. And those groups who emerged and have used violence against Israel and so on, they have emerged in that context, the denial of human rights, the denial of their land. I'm not here justifying, I'm explaining. There's a difference between explanation and justifications. Thirdly, about Gaza, Gaza has been under occupation, Israeli military occupation, since 1967. This is where the term the occupied Palestinian territories emerged. So Gaza is controlled by the Israeli military. If you look at the border of Gaza, what you can find is it's controlled by land, it's controlled by sea. The territorial waters of Gaza are controlled by the Israeli military. You're talking about 85% of Gaza fishing waters that are under the Israeli military. You're talking about 35% of the best land in Gaza are controlled by the Israeli military, and so on. And let's put that into context. Fishing and agriculture are a major source of income for people in the region there. So those two sources of income have been denied. Thirdly, about Gaza, the siege. Gaza has been under siege since 2007. So we're talking about more than 10 years. So this child refugee population has been dealing with this terrible siege that is there, and it's justified based on security reasons and so on. And within that siege, according to Breaking the Silence, an Israeli soldiers group, ex-soldiers group, who left the army based on political moral reasons, they have said within that context of siege and occupation, we were given the instructions to shoot in order to kill. It's what has been known as a shoot-to-kill policy. And you can look at Breaking the Silence on their website more and read more into this policy. So Gaza has experienced 3 major military attacks since 2008, siege and destruction. And it has also faced what has been known as the Dahiya Doctrine, which is the ultimate destruction of the infrastructure. This doctrine or military policy has been developed in the Lebanon, south of Lebanon, but yet was applied to Gaza in 2008, 2012, 2014. And I think given this destruction, given this historical injustice, the words of the British intellectual John Berger makes sense in this context. What he described the situation as is we are witnessing a careful destruction of a people and a promised nation. And around this destruction, there are small words and silence. This is what Palestine, this is what Gaza within Palestine has been facing. We're talking about silence and careful destruction. However, people who dare to critique, people who take a position, are accused of being anti-Semitic, okay, anti-Jewish people, and so on. But let's face it, the Israeli government has been very good, okay, at confusing anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. Okay? In other words, has been very good at confusing critique of state policy, the policies of the Israeli government in Gaza and the West Bank, confusing that with being anti-Jewish. Okay? The two are different. I think Judith Butler is right, the Jewish intellectual in the US, when she said we need to understand at the civil society level, at the academic level, that Israel isn't the representative of all Jewish people in the world. We need to get that notion. We cannot allow that to go on. We need to understand it's a government. And we are talking about, if we're talking about a government, we're talking about political interests. And political interests of the Israeli government do not represent all Jewish people in the world, including many groups in the US and Europe. So we need to speak to that. We need to understand it at the civil society level. We need to make the difference clear between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And let me be clear here. Jewish people were victims of European nationalism and discrimination. And Zionism victimized both Jewish people and Palestinian people for the sake of creating a Jewish state in the Middle East, or the state of Israel in the Middle East. So both Palestinians and Israelis have been victimized by both European nationalism and Zionism together. And therefore, the Palestinians, as Edward Said said, have become the victims of the victims, Jewish victims, have become the refugees of the refugees. That's what we're talking about. Now, let me move on in the next 5 minutes or so that I have to talk about what role the civil society, and I think I'm doing okay so far. Someone looking at me, but I'm okay, I think. I think I'm good. Let me talk about the role of activists, the role of academics. What can we do as activists, as academics? Let me just reflect on that a little bit. Activists and academics, and again using the case of Palestine, from my own view, need to affirm the debates and discussions that peace cannot exist without equality and justice. In this sector of community development, in this area of social work and so on, we talk about peace. And people tell me, Palestinians people, do they care about peace and so on? I say yes, but peace isn't the issue. The issue is denial of national rights, the issue of denial of access to land. The peace is also has been confused with the lack of self-determination and so on. So we need to be clear about what peace means, even in this framework here of community development. Peace means justice, and justice means equality, and equality means citizenship. We need to move beyond the notion of the symbol notion of the absence of violence, that peace means absence of violence. Peace needs to be understood in broader terms, meaning not only lack of violence, but also equality and justice. So we need to talk about peace that is supported by equality and justice. Secondly, we need to, as activists, as academics, and so on, we need to highlight the role of power and to challenge the role of power and its hidden interests and alliances. If we look at the role of the US, for example, in the case of Palestine, the US has for a long time presented itself as a mediator between Israel and the Palestinians. In this conflict, we are mediating. Simply, there are two sides, and we are mediating, and we're doing our best to bring them to peace. This is false. The US, for a long time, if you look at the record, since the 70s, has been playing the role of the mediator, but that comes with an explanation and a clear note. That is, the US has not only been a mediator, but also a lawyer for Israel, defending Israeli interests in the negotiation and the mediation. This word hasn't come from me, this particular word, the lawyer. It came from David Arthur Miller. He was working with the State Department for about 25 years, from the 80s and 90s and so on. And his conclusion is the US isn't a mediator in this issue. The US actually actively taking the side of Israel and defending Israeli interests as Israel's lawyer. That's what the role of the US has been there. So we need to challenge that. And we need to talk about more. We need to talk about mediation that is based on justice, on rights, and in inclusion, to include all the parties in any possible mediation and political settlement. Thirdly, as activists and as civil society and academics and so on, we need to talk about the role of representation and misrepresentation. People in this situation, including Palestine have been denied their voice, have been denied the opportunity to express who they are and what they want. And we need to be clear here, and whenever there's that denial is there, people have to be given a voice. And if they can't, for some reason, given the injustice and given the control, the military control, and so on, if they can't voice their opinion, if they can't have a say, I think civil society and academics need to support that role, the role of representation, and the role of also countering misrepresentations. The other point I wanted to speak about is that academia and also civil society in that context need to support the marginalized and the oppressed people who have been marginalized, people who have been oppressed, and raise awareness about their situation and about the injustice they have been facing. For a long time, we've been told as academic and civil society, you need to be neutral. You cannot talk about freedom. You cannot talk about political rights because this is too political. Okay? You need to be open to both sides. Yes, I'm open to both sides, but also my commitment is with the human rights. My commitment is with justice, and we need to be clear about that. So people have been marginalized for a long time and have been denied a voice, and therefore civil society and academia need to provide that space. And I'll finish on this point in a minute. Finally. I was given a talk in DCU about Palestinian statehood recognition at the UN, and I spoke a little bit about the situation on the ground and so on. And one British academic who was very well engaged said to me afterwards that, you know, the presentation was interesting, but you've got to think about distancing yourself from the issue. And I was thinking, what do you mean distancing myself from the issue? Taking a distance from it. I can't take a distance. I'm actually in the middle of it. You know, I'm not shy about that. And really that brings to me the point that is neutrality has been used as a cover. Okay, neutrality has been used as a cover for people to avoid their responsibility under human rights and international law. That's what it is. Thank you.